This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 44 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to ask the questions that you may have while listening to our podcast. We both believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult end-of-life decisions in advance.
Please relax and get yourself a little something to eat and drink, and thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me. In the first half, Charlie reports about dying laughing and has our recipe of the week. In the second and third half, we continue an interview series that I did over the past 2 years with Stephen Lemke about idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or IPF, and about lung transplants. This show is dedicated to Stephen, who died in Moorhead, Minnesota, 2 months ago. Hey, Charlie, what do you got for us this week?
Nothing. I got plenty of nothing and... Oh, sorry.
And nothing's plenty for me.
Actually, a funeral recipe. This week's funeral recipe...
I love funeral recipes.
Well, you won't be disappointed, I think. Maybe you will be. I don't know. Let's find out. This funeral recipe is a classic Midwestern comfort food served at funerals across the Midwest United States and Northwestern Canada. I get there's nothing in between. Also known as chow mein casserole or Minnesota hot dish. I bet you are wondering what a Minnesota hot dish is. Well,
I'm a Michigan hot dish, so...
Yes, I didn't want to go there, but I'm glad you did. But I still censor what I was going to say about that. Yes, but it is none other than the unofficial state cuisine of Minnesota, a comfort food staple found in households. Hot dish is a type of casserole that incorporates a mixture of simple, thrifty ingredients and the dump and stir method. That's a technical term, right? I think dump and stir. I'm sure it is.
Not shaken.
No.
Dumped and stirred.
Not shake and bake, but dump and stir. Exactly.
Got it.
This recipe is an easy-to-prepare ground beef and rice casserole with cream soup and chow mein noodles. But...
good.
Yes, but... man does not live by bread alone. Occasionally, there must be a beverage. A French hospital serves wine and caviar to palliative care patients. It's France, folks. What are they going to serve? Beer and pretzels? Humor and hospice are words most people don't associate as going together, like Batman and Robin, steak and eggs, a double scotch. People expect that hospice is a time for sadness and grief, and certainly there are those times. If you tell someone you work in hospice, they get a solemn look on their face and say, that is just too depressing. I could never do that kind of work. But hospice can also be a place for humor. A study from Kent State published in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Care revealed that humor was present in 85% of 132 observed nurse-based visits. Additionally, 70% of the humor was initiated by the patient. You throw a banana peel on the floor of a nursing home and, yes, humor will be initiated by the patient. If humor is part of living, then why should it not be part of dying? Laughter in dying is not to be confused with die laughing or death from laughter, which is a rare form of death, usually from either cardiac arrest, which is different from a heart attack, or asphyxiation caused by a fit of laughter. Instances of death by laughter have been recorded from ancient Greece to modern times. Sometimes laughing too hard can be dangerous. One ancient account of death from laughter is the death of Greek philosopher Chrysippus, also known as the man who died from laughing at his own joke, in the 3rd century BC. The story goes, he died from laughter after he saw a donkey eating his figs. He told the servant to give the donkey wine to wash them down. He laughed so hard at his joke it killed him. Yeah, I don't find it that funny either, so I don't know how to. So I guess he just must have amused himself.
He must have been drinking the wine before he said that, which is why he found it so funny.
You know what? That's it. And then he just started laughing and then choked on it. Okay, good. Mystery solved.
And next week in our unsolved mystery cases, we have...
More recently, in 1989, during the film A Fish Called Wanda. Marianne, have you seen A Fish Called Wanda?
I've seen it multiple times.
Me too.
Very funny.
I do too.
I love when those dogs keep getting killed. Oh, I made Charlie choke. He's going to die from laughter.
I'm dying here. That was very funny. It's poor. So one of the characters, played by Michael Palin, he just loves animals.
Oh my God.
Dear to his heart. So, and he just accidentally keeps killing these pets. Oh, yeah. All right, see the film. You'll see. It's very, very funny.
Really.
So, anyways, during watching A Fish Called Wanda, a 56-year-old Danish audiologist called Ole Betson reportedly laughed himself to death. Laughter itself doesn't kill, but in rare circumstances, it can trigger a condition where you will die laughing. For our purposes, laughing improves a mood and attitude. As for the rest of the story of the French hospital serving wine to people at the end of life, you will have to stay tuned for that one on an upcoming episode of Everyone Dies. Such a tease. Marianne, do you know what's holding up that report?
No, Charles. I can't even begin to imagine who hasn't turned in their report yet.
Yeah, me neither. We'll have to ask Sandy about that.
It's probably her.
Yeah, it's probably Sandy. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Charlie.
So please go to our webpage for the chow mein casserole or Minnesota hot dish recipe. Maybe a couple of photos of that Minnesota hot dish too. We'll see. And additional resources for this program. We hope you will follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. We are working with a company called Haibu. We really need your feedback and evaluation. So please take a minute and go to haibu.us/BOZMB. And this is on our webpage, so you can just easier just to go to the webpage and click it on. And show notes. Yes, both.
Yeah.
To leave us feedback. As a licensed nonprofit organization, we are dependent on the kindness of our beloved listeners and always appreciate your donations, which are tax deductible. If you find this podcast to be of help to you, and many of you have, please go to our webpage to donate so that we can continue to provide quality shows about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement at everyonedies.org. That's dies.org. Marianne?
Stephen Lemke was somebody that we interviewed numerous times here on Everyone Dies. And he was somebody I met on Facebook because I saw him posting to somebody who was preparing for a lung transplant that if somebody needed to have a companion, that he would be willing to do that. And one of the major barriers for many people who need a transplant is that they have to have a caregiver who agrees to be with them for the entire 3 months of the thing and go with them to wherever the transplant's going to happen. And for when I worked at the VA hospital, many of our vets didn't have anybody in their life that could do that could take the time to go do that, or maybe they just didn't have anybody at all. And Stephen was offering to do that, which is a major commitment. And so I messaged him and we talked, and I had a couple wonderful interviews with him, and he was he'd message me back and forth and that kind of thing. So Stephen was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and had a double lung transplant 7 years ago. And the 2 years of COVID was really hard for Stephen. He had COVID twice with long stays in the hospital. He had additional cancer diagnosis. He had a skin cancer that is something that can happen after organ transplants because of the medications, the anti-rejection medications that people have to take. And then he was diagnosed with bladder cancer.
Brother.
Now, Stephen spent a lot of time helping other people learn about and coping with IPF. And he talked very openly about IPF in his interviews with me. And this interview is really interesting in that we talk about what it takes to qualify for a lung transplant. A lot of people I've heard patients say, well, I'll just get a transplant without really knowing what's all involved in getting approved for a transplant. So this interview is really good in that Stephen talks to you about what he went through in order to qualify for his double lung transplant. Stephen died at age 69 on March 26, 2022. He was in hospice, and for a lot of the time up until the end, he was still messaging and talking with me. So this show and this interview is in memory of Stephen, and we hope that you learn about lung transplants.
Now today, it's my pleasure to have Stephen Lemke back. He, if you haven't listened to the recording that we did about IPF, please go to the website and take a listen to that one. IPF is a lung disease that Steve was diagnosed with a while ago, and there's drugs that can help slow down the course of that disease, but the kind of best symptom management for that is available now for that disease is a lung transplant. Now, organ transplantation is the process of surgically transferring a donated organ to someone who's diagnosed with organ failure. So in the case of Stephen, his lungs were failing, so he had 2 lungs transplanted. But many diseases can lead to organ failure, including heart disease, diabetes, hepatitis, cystic fibrosis, cirrhosis. Injury and birth defects may also cause organ failure. So it was Stephen's IPF that caused his lungs to not be functioning they were needing to, and he began the process for a lung transplant. So Stephen, hello and welcome back.
Well, hello, thank you.
Stephen's going to become our frequent flyer about how to explain all of these different aspects of having a serious illness, and I've only just talked to him over the phone, but I absolutely love talking to him, so I hope that everyone enjoys this interview today. So how did you go about making the decision to have a lung transplant, or 2 lungs transplanted?
Well, I was given the decision, as you say, by my doctor when he said, the only hope you have is a lung transplant. So I just went along with that thinking, oh, this is it. I mean, if I don't get a lung transplant, life is over.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just went along with it, and I went along for the ride. And at this point, I consider myself an old-timer now because I have passed the 5-year mark since my transplant.
Right,
so
just recently, right? Last month.
Yes, August 21st of this year was 5 years. And
so we're throwing up the confetti and saying congratulations.
Oh, God, yes, it's absolutely wonderful. And so I have been on the roller coaster of, what it's like at this point. So I feel like I have, confidence enough to talk about it. It hasn't been just a few months or a year or something,
Mm-hmm. So what's the process of getting listed, of getting on that the list to get an organ?
Well, what I went through was extreme testing. I believe I had 50 or 60 tests that went. It took 9 days of testing for various different things. I mean, at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and my wife and we were down there for 14 days, and including the weekends, and it was from 7 in the morning until 4 or 5 every day, nonstop. No time to stop for a break or lunch or anything. It's just that if you happen to get a minute, you gobble down a sandwich or something, and it's very difficult. And I was in a wheelchair. My wife pushed me around for 9 days, carrying a oxygen tank on 10 liters per minute of oxygen, and there was
10 liters. Wow.
They have people at the clinic that you can call at any time, and say, "Oh, I'm running out of oxygen," and they'll run you up another tank. Or in my case, they just kind of followed me around because I'd go through them so fast. And I would go through a tank in an hour or so, just sitting in the wheelchair. I mean, not even doing anything. Because every time I'd go into an appointment, they would have oxygen coming out of a port in the wall that you would hook you up to. You weren't on your tank every time you were inside of any office. So after the 9 days of testing, I mean everything. They test your heart, your liver, your kidneys. You go. I had wires shoved up my arteries, and I've got holes in my neck where they go into my neck looking for things. And I mean, it's just, very rigorous testing. And I think anybody who's thinking about going through the transplant has to understand that it's not just you go in there and you talk to a doctor and they say, "Okay, we're going to put you on the list." That's not in reality whatsoever. It's 9 days of rigorous testing. You have to fast every day, so you only really get to eat on the weekends. And then once you're done with all the testing, of course, a board meets of all different types of doctors and all the doctors you went through the tests with, and they make a decision if you should be a candidate for a transplant. And even
so
if you are...
Let me interrupt just for a second. So the purpose the purpose of all the testing is to make sure that everything else is working the way it should or better, except for the part that they're going to switch out.
Yes, right. And
so if you have diabetes, or if you have liver failure, or you're overweight, or if you're smoking or whatever, if you have any of those things, that's going to knock you out, right?
Yes, unless it's like very, very borderline, then what they would do is they would just say, "Okay, we want you to take care of this, see if you can lose 10 pounds or whatever it might be. Get your cholesterol down, do some exercise, whatever their recommendation might be, and then we'll see you again if you can accomplish this, And the way it was explained to me is if you take a ruler, a 12-foot or 12-inch ruler, and there's a spot right in the middle, right on 6 inches, and if you get in that spot, like you don't have this wrong, you don't have that wrong, but you excel in this and you excel in that, and they can fit you into that 6-inch mark, then you are a candidate. And if you are a candidate, then of course they all meet again, and you go through less rigorous testing to see if they should put you on the transplant list. Because if you're a candidate,
also include depression and mood and that kind of thing?
Oh, of course, yes, yes. I had to meet with a psychiatrist more than once, um, and all the time. I mean, these doctors are not just trained in their specialty. They are watching you. They're aware. They see how you're acting. They see how you answer the questions. They see if you're paying attention. And this is all taken into consideration before you are put on the list. And they all compare notes. They're all a team. It's the transplant team.
Mm-hmm.
More specific, it's the heart and lung transplant team at Mayo Clinic, and they all confide with each other constantly. If one of them throws up a flag, then then the rest of them might start watching and say, yeah, well, maybe not. You have to, it's very you have to have that good attitude. You have to want it. You have to need it. I mean, it's a lot more than just taking a breath test or an X-ray. It's very involved.
And part of the reason for that is because they know what comes after the transplant, which we're going to talk about. Because you have to, if you are fussing about, being in Minnesota for 9 days and how come I waited 10 minutes for this appointment or whatever, that will play into, oh, sister, you got a long road ahead of you. If you're complaining about this now, there's going to be a lot more, and are you going to be able to handle it? Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, that is right on. You nailed it. That was even brought up to me at one time.
Oh, really?
Yes. On the last day of my 14 days or 9 days of tests, I met with the psychiatrist again, and all this time I've been on steroids and I haven't been eating. I've been fasting every day, and I was getting a little snippy,
Mm-hmm.
And the psychiatrist threw up a red flag. She said, I don't think you can do this. She said, if you can't handle this, you don't need to be being taken care of by our staff and be grumpy and snippy with them. They don't deserve that.
Wow.
And so I had to take all that into consideration, and I had to go home, and I had to adjust my attitude. And of course, on the return visit then, I met with the psychiatrist again for quite a long time, and she then approved me. But
Mm-hmm.
the first time she said, no, I don't think you have the right attitude for this. And so I had to go home and really think, that yes, I was sick and I was on all these steroids and I was stressed, but that's not anybody else's problem,
Well, and it's not going to necessarily end with getting the transplant, right? So when
Right.
we get to that, right?
Yes, that could hold you back.
So they approved you, and how long did you have to wait once you were approved?
Well, I was very lucky. I was approved. Well, I finished up the testing in about the middle of May, and I got a letter in the middle of June that I was approved to be on the transplant list. And at that time, I was, I think, in my blood type, in my clinic, fourth in line
Wow.
to get a transplant. And
so to
but
be
I mean,
clear
it was
for
still
so to be clear for the listeners, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but sometimes I think I need to clear this up.
No, you're doing fine.
So the first hurdle is you find a transplant center, you get accepted, you go through all of that testing. They meet, and at that point they can say yes. Any place along this way, you can be kind of bumped out of the queue.
Yeah.
And then you finally make it, so they say, okay, we're gonna list you. Well, now that you're listed, does that mean you get an organ right away? No. It depends on what organ you need, what tissue type you are. There's other factors, so then you're put on the list. And then you wait.
Yes. Right.
Okay.
And then there's people on the list ahead of you that have been on there for whoever knows, that could be on there for a week or 2 years, so they're ahead of you because, you basically are looking for the same pair of lungs. And so I was fourth in line, and this was the middle of June. And of course I would look online every day and say, am I moving up? Am I moving up? And I never did. And then I went back for, because once you're done with that, the 9 days of testing, they want to see you back like every couple of weeks, depending on what condition you are in or how bad you really need the lungs. For me, every 2 weeks I had to go back for 3 or 4 more visits, and they would do more things. And in the middle of July, I was on the list for 1 month. I was there, and I did a 6-minute walk test and a pulmonary breathing test. And when I finished those, they immediately put me into the hospital because I had deteriorated that fast in a short period of time. And they just said, I hope you brought an overnight bag because I'm getting the room ready for you, out of nowhere, surprise to me. And so I went into the hospital that day. And then I waited in the hospital for 30 days, 35 days.
They kept you in the hospital for 35 days?
Yes, on what's called an optiflow. And I was on 45 liters per minute of oxygen.
Holy
24/7 for 35 days.
Oh my gosh.
And so because they wanted me right there when they came in, they didn't want to lose any time. And also I couldn't get enough oxygen at home.
Right.
Had I stayed at home, I would have just died. And so once they put me into the hospital, and I moved up to number 1 on the list for my blood type. So I guess the other patients who were ahead of me, the other 3, weren't as bad. They were still at home. They were still able to function. So I moved ahead of them.
I see.
And one of the things that I have to express that I can't express enough is that for, I'm going to say, a good 6 months prior to even going to the testing, and then my 35 days in the hospital, I went to pulmonary therapy. And I was told after the fact, after the transplant, that's one of the reasons that I made that list so high, was because I was physically strong from going to pulmonary therapy twice a week for about 2 hours each time, and I would walk on a treadmill, lift light weights, be on a bicycle, whatever the pulmonary therapist decided that I was strong enough to do and capable of doing, I did. And even on the treadmill, if I was only going 1 or 2 miles an hour with no incline, if I did that for 20, 30 minutes every day, that's what made me strong enough to go through this.
Wow.
A lot of people will they say, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. Well, I'm sorry. You're probably not, you're not going to make it. That's one of the reasons I was picked, was because they figured that I had enough leg muscles and to be able to go through what you have to go through after the transplant.
So it's almost like getting on an Olympic team. You have to train for it. You have to be ready for it.
Yes, I would advise that strongly to anybody who is considering a transplant. If you haven't already, start walking. If you're able to walk outside, walk outside. If not, get a treadmill, get into a club, do something. But you have to walk, even if it's a half a mile an hour to start, you know?
Mhm. So
you have to push your wheelchair around, whatever, but get up and walk.
Right. Now, there's a financial part of this, isn't there?
Yes, there's an obligation you have. Yes, I mean, because
does it depend on your insurance? I mean, are there a lot of copays that people have to prepare for?
Well, in my case, my wife had insurance through her employer, and also I was on Medicare. So between the two of those, they virtually paid for everything. I think we had like a $2,000 copay or something just for the year, blanket for the year. And so it cost like $2,000 a year for all of these services. And the medication that you have to take for the rest of your life after the transplant is extremely expensive. So they want to make sure that you have a source to pay for that.
So is that part of the consideration of getting onto the transplant list? Like, do they look at money?
Well, they never really come out and said that, but because I had the finances, they didn't bring it up. But I think yes.
Okay, so that would be something to think about if you're thinking about getting on that list.
Yeah, yes, inquire early, you know.
Yeah. So I understand that, there has to be somebody who will commit to being a caregiver or a care partner for transplants. And I've seen people who haven't been able to have transplants because they didn't have that support system to go be with them during the testing and during the transplant. Can you talk about that?
Yes, that is a requirement, and it is that is another thing that I didn't really understand completely until afterwards, because you're really immobile. I was anyway. I have to speak just only for myself. I was completely immobile for a while. My surgery took 14 hours, and then I was out I went in on a Friday night. I didn't wake up until Wednesday. So during all this time, I mean, they're keeping you out. You're getting a lot of drugs into your system, and it messes with your mind and with your memory. And so after the transplant, it takes a long time just to remember to take your pills, or remember which ones to take at what time.
Well, plus, when you go, like you went to Mayo, don't they require that you have a care person be there for your surgery?
You have to. Well, my requirements were you have to have a caretaker with you all the time for 3 months. After, you have to stay in town. We had to stay in Rochester for 3 months after the transplant before they could even think about releasing me to go home.
Do they give you housing there? Is that part of your insurance?
Well, there is a place. Well, yeah, they have what is called a gift of life transplant house, and if they have room there, you and your caretaker can stay there for it's a cost. It's like $30 a day, and you bring your own food. You have your own room, the community kitchen. There's it's just they have 2 of those houses there, and but we did not do that. We rented a house because we had a dog and 2 kids that we were there with, and the kids had to go to school and continue their life as normal. And so we rented a house while we were there, and the insurance, our insurance anyway, covered a certain amount of the rent of the house as long as I was there.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
if, for let's say they covered $75 a day, and every day that I stayed in that house, we would get $75 towards the rent.
Mhm.
But if I had to go back into the hospital for something, then, and my wife and kids were just there, then the insurance didn't cover anything because I was in the hospital.
Okay.
And in my case, I got a infection in my wound, my opening, and I was back in the hospital for 40 more days. So,
Oh my gosh.
so for those 40 days, of course, the rent wasn't covered, you know.
Mhm. So it's
yeah,
a big commitment for people's families,
yes,
and you do have to have, it's a required, if you don't have a caretaker that can be with you through the process, you're not going to make it onto the list. And like I said,
yes, yeah, that's right.
well, I've worked in oncology before I retired, and I mean I had patients who had nobody, and they couldn't get past that hurdle. They couldn't get on the list.
Right,
So
right.
I know that you're not going to make it past that. So that's a big commitment for a caretaker, because if they have a job, or you know, I mean, you're,
Yes,
as a family, you were able to pick up and move like that, but that's not always a situation that people are in.
that's right. And luckily, my wife was able to work from home,
Oh,
and so
that's lucky.
she didn't lose any work time,
Mhm.
and so I mean that was extremely helpful. You know, some people have to actually just stop working, and you know, in order to be a caretaker. And I just want to say that I have went online, and I have gone on to transplant groups and IPF groups, and I have volunteered to be a caretaker for anyone who doesn't have one.
So
I would
you would be able
volunteer.
to give up and change your life and go to another city for 3 months?
I would do that to save somebody's life. Yes.
Wow,
So
that's
far,
an incredible offer.
so far I have had, you know, like probably a couple hundred or more people saying, "Wow," you know, just like you have, and but
Mhm.
no takers yet. But yeah, if somebody is dying and their only thing that's holding them back is they don't have a caretaker, yeah, I would do that.
That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal. So, how did your kids and wife, if you can speak for them, how did they manage being in a strange city for 3 months? Was it like
Not very well. Not very
a
well.
family adventure, or no?
Well, my kids, you know, they were in Taekwondo here at home, and they were
Mhm.
also both in band.
Mhm.
And my older son was in 10th grade, and he actually had just joined marching band, and he was actually in 3 different types of band. So that was important to him. So when my wife got him enrolled in school there, of course he joined all the band. He was at the marching band at the school he went to, and he was involved in all the band activities. And we enrolled them in a Taekwondo class there so they could keep up with their. And then, of course, with all the social media, they were on, you know, online with their friends all the time, and so that part didn't change much. But it's the missing their friends, you know,
Mhm.
actually being in a school where their friends were, that part was tough on them.
Yeah.
Um, my daughter had my first grandchild while I was in the hospital,
Wow.
and luckily, when the baby was like a month old, they drove the 300 miles by my daughter and her husband and the baby, and I got to see and hold my granddaughter for the first time.
Oh, that's great
and,
that she did that.
I was out of the hospital then the second time, just before Thanksgiving, and one of my wife's sisters that lives in Omaha, and my daughter and son-in-law and the baby, we all gathered at our rental house and had Thanksgiving. And
nice.
so that was very nice. You know, that was fantastic. That brought some of the feeling of being at home. You know, it was a regular Thanksgiving that my wife cooked, and it was very nice. So that all made a big difference. You know.
So the kids were able to kind of realize it's a short-term thing and you'll be back with your friends, and they dealt with it? Or have there been like long-term issues for them?
No, I mean, it wasn't easy for them, and I think it took them a while to get over it. But once they were here, got settled back in with their friends, they were younger, flexible. I think that no, it wasn't any long-term issues with them at all. But it was tough while it was going on.
Oh, it had to be. Plus, people are worried about you and all of those issues.
Right.
So we're going to do a third interview with Stephen where we talk about the follow-up. So we've talked about the disease, in part one. We've talked about the incredibly detailed and arduous lung transplant. But then once you have the lung, it ain't over. So we'll do a third, right? We'll do a third interview for people who are considering transplants as to, so what happens next? And the next part is a huge story in and of itself. So Stephen's agreed to do another chat with me, and we'll go into that part. Right, Stephen?
Oh, yes, of course. I'm looking forward to it.
Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Like sand through an hourglass. What? This is Charlie Navarrete with a quote often attributed to Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, which he apparently never said. Death smiles at all of. Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Like sand through an hourglass. What? This is Charlie Navarrete with a quote often attributed to Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, which he apparently never said. Death smiles at us all. All a man can do is smile back.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Rest in peace, Stephen. And every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.